All right. Thank you so much. I guess we can start with some introductions, but it will be me, Lauren, and Lexi giving a presentation today on environmental justice and a little bit about Avery and who that is and why it's even titled this way, right? So hi, everyone. I'm Terrell Engman. I am currently a third-year PhD student in the biomolecular sciences program here at Boise State University, studying breast cancer metastasis and how cell signaling can lead to it, and doing some cancer drug development stuff. And yeah, also the co-founder of Basilica Bio, which I will talk more about what that is in a second. And then I'll let Lauren and Lexi introduce themselves as well.
Hey everyone, I'm Lexi. I'm our design and communications director at Basilica Bio. I went to UW with Terrell and Lauren, but I graduated back in 2021.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an education lead here at Basilica. I got my undergraduate degree in biology from the University of New Mexico, and I'm here in Seattle, and I just received my Master of Public Health and Epidemiology from UW, and I'm really happy to be on the Basilica team.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're just gonna jump right into it. I'm gonna share my screen, and we have an interactive presentation for y'all today. So hopefully everyone will take something away. So let me just get started here. Ooh, there we go. All right, can everyone see this? Awesome. So just a little bit about Basilica Bio first. Like I mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Basilica Bio. Our other co-founder wasn't able to make it today. It's actually him and his girlfriend's third anniversary. So they're spending the day together, which is amazing. This is a picture of me and him at my graduation back in 2019 from the University of Washington. And right after this, I embarked on a journey through an undergraduate travel fellowship to go to a few countries. And my theme for my trip was learning about public health in an international context. So I got to go and explore a lot of different communities and learn about, what their barriers to health were. As we all experienced, the COVID-19 pandemic put an end to that and really all travel and the entire world as we knew it. So I was back at home in quarantine, and we were having conversations talking about our role in especially the Black community in a time like this, especially with the protests surrounding the murder of George Floyd and the country really reckoning with a lot of its systems of oppression. And so we decided to do something about it and to take action. And that's when we formed Basilica Bio, which will explain a little bit here what that is and how we are, trying to affect change in the community through it. But first, a little bit about mine and Jordan's path to science. We had a strong interest in science from a young age. And as we got older, we saw the incredible power that science holds. And we saw that science is interdisciplinary and not, just lab work, not just working, in medical settings, but working in the community. And we wanted to try to harness that power that we saw that science had in order to affect positive change in communities that needed it the most. And so we're embracing intersections through science, which lends to our sort of slogan, which is let's gather around science. So like I mentioned, we have two main things that Basilica Bio works on with the help of our amazing team. One is educate and one is engaging with the local community. We have two sort of programs under those umbrellas. One is the Community Classroom Initiative for education, and then the other is our Gardening Under the Microscope events, which are how we work in community. So essentially, we work to bring topics of environmental justice in particular to teachers, primarily high school teachers, that find difficulty in tying it to their current curriculum or in finding ways to get beyond the lesson plans and classroom activities to doing some action outside of the classroom. We help to facilitate some of those conversations and do professional development and things like that for educators. In addition, for the engage piece, we have our Gardening Under the Microscope events, where we have our mobile classroom set up, a projector screen, and we go out to Black urban farming sites or community centers. We actually work primarily in the Central District at the Garfield Community Center, where we give a presentation once a month on different topics relating to environmental justice, like the history of the environmental justice movement or how certain policies have led to community structures that affect our health outcomes and things like that. So yeah, and then after we give that presentation to sort of contextualize the work that we do, we let folks actually get hands-on in the garden and help to bolster our hyper-local food systems. And all of the jargon that I'm using, we're going to break down and tackle together today. So just sort of introducing some of these ideas. So yeah, that's our engagement piece, and we find that folks are really excited to learn about why it's so important to have access to healthy foods and how soil and pollutant emitters and things like that actually control the health of a population. So yeah. I also want to give a big shout out to our education team. We have from left to right, Kemia Kinlasotu, Chiedza Bandura, and then our own Lauren Sarkissian, who was with us today. Also a big shout out to Lexi, who's not on the education team, but does a million amazing things for us. These are just the folks that put the presentation together that we're gonna be working with today. All right. So just to open it up, I just want to put some open-ended questions out there, and maybe we can get some responses in the chat, or folks can just raise their hand or shout out. What are some of the policies that have shaped the communities we live in today? And then two, how has community structure impacted health outcomes? So again, if there are any ideas about that, feel free to share out or put in the chat what you all think. Is someone sharing out? I thought I heard somebody.
A big patch.
I can't see the names.
Let me need to use some of the things in the chat. We have expansionism, gentrification of our neighborhoods.
Okay. Expansionism. Would the person that sent that be willing to elaborate a little bit on that?
That was me. So expansionism, I mean, we started off primarily on the East Coast, and then during colonialization, and then we started moving west. And so a lot of the policies that we see as we move further and further west are more about that expansion of the United States into spaces like the Southwest, which is where I live, or just even the Midwest and all those different spaces.
Right, definitely. Yes, I think that that's an extremely important piece of how we ended up in the space that we are in today. As we all know, we're on stolen land, and so that definitely informs the way that we, have been able to, structure our communities. So yes, I also see in the chat gentrification of our neighborhoods, which is extremely important. Redlining, enforced segregation, which we'll actually be talking about today. Zoning policies and wastewater management, the type of buildings that we can, put in certain areas, the types of prices that, tend to be set in those places. The GI Bill, private versus public schools, and the equity of monetary resources, 100%. The taxes on those things being the things that drive community growth, right? So yeah, those are a lot of really good answers. And do folks have, so those are a lot of policies. Do folks have any ideas about how community structure then impacts the health outcomes of the people that live in those communities? And we'll just take another second on this just to see if anyone has anything, because these are the questions that we're going to answer today. Access to groceries, definitely. We're going to talk about affordable versus non-affordable groceries and distance to, amenities like that, like groceries. And also access to transportation to kind of go along with that. Okay, so we're gonna move forward, but yeah, be keeping those questions in mind as we move through this presentation. All right. So somebody mentioned redlining, and so we'll touch really briefly on redlining. It's the discriminatory practice of keeping people in certain communities, like communities of color, from accessing loans. And of course, here we have a map of the greater Seattle area, which is where our organization is based out of. Here in D5, you can see the Central District, which is where we do much of our work. And it's a historically redlined community. And so that affected, it's a very economic based policy in that businesses that were in the area, would not stay, right? Because they weren't getting, business. Different resources kind of followed and left those areas due to redlining. So that had an impact not only at the time, but it has a generational impact that continues to affect what resources are in historically redlined neighborhoods, as well as, things like green space and other amenities that we're going to touch on. So somebody touched on that one already, so we can move forward. In addition to redlining, there were also racial restrictive covenants. So redlining was just discrimination based on your risk to loaning to, and that risk was assessed mainly based on your race. But racial restrictive covenants kind of cut out the middleman and just said, if you are this race, you can't live here, period. Even if you have the money associated, with the cost, if you have the means to be able to pay and you don't need loans, you still can't live in this area. So the Hansberry House I put on here, it's one of the first racial restrictive covenant lawsuit wins from an African American family. And if anyone recognizes the last name Hansberry, Lorraine Hansberry wrote the famous play A Raisin in the Sun, and this is the house that she grew up in. So it was one of the first racial restrictive covenant lawsuit wins in history. But let's just jump right into some of the consequences of these sorts of policies and how they actually had an effect on community structure. So one thing that we mention a lot are pollutant emitters and the citing of those pollutant emitters. And those are frequently cited in communities of color due to lack of socioeconomic influence. So again, especially in these areas where money was kept out of these communities in the form of refusing loans to communities of color, that had a direct impact on the amount of say they had and what was actually included in their neighborhoods. So many of these pollutant emitters were cited in communities of color as a result of that. And so here are some types of pollutant emitters. We have like big factories, we have highways that have frequent traffic down them that also emit a lot of pollutants as a result. And then we have landfills. And there are several examples of these being targeted in communities of color for landfills and dumping in particular. One topic that we won't get to today, but that is extremely important, were the dumping of polychloral biphenyls, which are PCBs, in Warren County in the 1980s. This community was well aware of the health risks associated with PCBs, but they were overpowered. Many of them were arrested during their protests, and they were dumped in the 80s, and the cleanup is still happening to this day, or might have just recently finished. Also in Seattle, which is a predominantly people of color community, it's basically an industrial park. So there's factories and large industrial vehicles that are moving past homes all the time, and that is almost certainly affecting the health of the people that live there. So this is all due to a lack of say and a lack of economic power when it comes to these sorts of sightings. So let's move on to the EPA Superfund, because that community that I just mentioned in the South Park, Georgetown area actually is on the Duwamish River, which is classified as a Superfund site by the EPA. So the Congress passed the Comprehensive Environmental Response and Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, in 1980. So that is what actually is used to classify these sites as Superfund sites. And that put the EPA in charge of managing designating and supporting the cleanup of what are also called brownfields or Superfund sites, while holding negligent businesses accountable. So those businesses are actually forced to either, if they were running a factory, or, there's a business that has a lot of, toxic outputs, once they're done in that area, or if they pollute to a certain level, they have to either do the cleanup themselves or foot the bill for the cleanup. So this is sort of a way to manage after the fact pollution that happens in the community. And it's actually shown that community members of color are more likely to live closer to a Superfund site. So that's again, we're kind of getting to this theme of disparities that are caused as a result of these environmental hazards and environmental injustices with those toxic materials because of waste mismanagement, and they harbor harmful chemicals like pesticides, petroleum products, heavy metals, and other toxicants. And the closer that someone lives to a contaminated site, the more that they are likely to be harmed by the chemicals that they contain. And so in the greater Seattle area, there are 3 that we've marked here, and those are all located in the same 5-mile radius in the port area of West Seattle, are more likely to be communities of color, and more likely to impact the health outcomes of those community members as well. So the effects of targeted pollution: housing prices go down if you live next to pollutant emitter that's been cited there. So that really affects your ability to be mobile, economically mobile. Housing is one of the main ways for economic mobility in our system. So if your housing value is greatly depreciated because of factories or highways or whatever it may be, then you have a lot less options and freedom, and that affects your public health, right? And your social determinants of health. Also health problems, which are directly caused, which we'll talk a little bit about in a second. And then community structure as well, and community amenities are completely fractured, as a result of these as well. So it's really very interconnected, and it's a domino effect, really, that started before, which kind of explains why certain communities have certain amenities and other communities don't. And so we're going to get to breaking that down a little bit more here in a second.
So I'm going to take it over from here. So like Terrell was saying, we've got a legacy, specifically communities of color don't have access to a reliable in the chat, which obviously when you don't have access to good quality community, not having, proper sources, which has a lot of health. So that's part of this food apartheid. Have a lot of Dollar Generals or Family Dollars, but not traditional grocery stores. And I can agree. I grew up in New Mexico. It's very rural. There's a lot of space, and you can miles and miles, and there's no kind of reliable places to get healthy food with much consistency. And that's a huge problem. And so, like I said, when you don't have access to resources like healthy food and so therefore they end up in the emergency rooms. This untreated diabetes can lead to all sorts of really burden of some of these community structure and policies on. So the reason we bring up asthma and diabetes are these